Okay, and we're back. Sometimes things take a little bit long to start, just like the CAP. And we are going to be talking about the CAP this morning. And I've got three fantastic guests with me, but I just wanted to give a quick sort of overview of where my reporting has informed me we are when it comes to European farming policy. So, we had an agreement, a political deal on the CAP, Europe's main farm subsidies scheme, back in June, after a lot of heated negotiations, and we're now sort of waiting to see how countries are going to implement the new rules agreed at the Brussels level on their own national level. So we've got a lot to talk about, from what countries are actually going to be doing to how strongly the Commission is going to be playing the role of the green policeman and checking that the Green Deal and the CAP can kind of align. How does the European Parliament think that the negotiations went? And how do farmers really think that that this new policy and the new different allocations of money are actually going to affect them? So on the stage with me, and it's very nice to have people in person. First of all, we have Wolfgang Burtscher, the Director General of DG Agri. Let's just check your microphone and see if you can hear us. We can hear you. Sorry. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Fantastic. We have Palle Borgström, who's a dairy farmer, the Vice President of COPA, so the main EU umbrella farmers association, and also President of the LRF, which is the Federation of Swedish Farmers. Good morning. And we have Thomas Weitz, a Green MEP, who is from Austria. Also a farmer in his own right, just like Palle is, but doing different kinds of techniques. Let's not get into it. Let's hold our horses. So Thomas has an organic mountain farm in southern Styria, which has been working since the end of the 1990s with bees, sheep, forestry. We can talk about that in detail. So let's dive in and let's talk about what does this new CAP actually contain? How's it going to change things? First of all, there have been lots of negative reactions. So I actually wanted to start with Palle. Why are you unhappy, or which elements are you unhappy with in this new CAP?
First of all, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share the COPA views on the CAP reform. And I would also say thank you to the European institutions and to DG Agri for the support you have been doing to make it possible for the institutions to finalize the agreement so we can get to work. Farmers want to do their part of the work to make agriculture more sustainable, climate friendly, and environmental friendly. The CAP that we see now and the one we had before is not perfect, but before we go into the details, I think we should actually remind us a little bit of what we have accomplished this far with CAP. And I would say that the common agriculture policy in Europe is one of the most successful policy areas. It goes back to actually the Treaty of Rome and the idea of food sovereignty, which we didn't have at that time. And the CAP has made it possible for the EU agriculture to produce safe, nutritious and high quality products and reflect all the different food traditions that are all around Europe, with affordable prices for consumers and at least providing farmers with an income that have made it possible for them to continue and actually increase the production. If you look at the lines around the world of agriculture policy, there are two major lines. One is the one that it's conducted in Japan and Switzerland and Norway is highly protective. They provide high income for farmers, but they fail on affordability for consumers. And you have the other line, which is represented by America, which is very quick responding to market changes, but they produce commodities and they don't produce high quality products. We have managed in Europe to combine these two.
Well, let me take you back, because before we were talking, before this panel, all of us had quite a heated phone call, but what you said was that the new eco schemes element of the CAP, you see that as actually eating into the direct payments budget, which is the basic payment that farmers receive. So you're not really happy with the way that the new eco schemes budget has been allocated.
It depends on how it plays out. There are three major elements in the new CAP. It's the new delivery model, It's the ring fencing of a part of 25% of the direct payments into eco schemes, and it's the enhanced conditionality. The eco schemes, I know that there was a push for getting that 25% as high as possible, but the higher you get there, the more you risk of being greenwashing instead of actually doing concrete work that makes difference for sustainability. The trick is now for member states to find those measures in the eco schemes that will allow farmers, no matter where they are around in Europe and no matter where they have, what kind of production they have, to be able to get access to this money and actually do the work of doing CAP more climate friendly and sustainable. But if we push that too far, farmers, they need time to adopt. They have invested a lot of money into their production, and they need time to change. If we push that too far, we won't reach what we want to reach.
Okay, so that's the COPA quick summary of how the last sort of 3 years of negotiations went on the common agricultural policy and what we're going to end up with from 2023 to 2027. I want to go to Thomas Weitz, Green MEP. How do you see what's your reaction to that and where we are with the eco schemes? Is it ambitious enough? How do you? I mean, I can imagine what you're going to say, but how do you actually think about the feasible element? I know many people are kind of worried that I'll finish my question soon. And many people are worried that farmers are not actually going to rush to take up these eco schemes. Do you think that's a false fear?
Well, it always depends. I mean, farmers are basically doing what they can get rewarded from the markets for. Farmers are able to change pretty fast. I mean, not in every production scheme. With animal production, it takes a bit longer, but when it comes to crops, you can actually change your agricultural practices from one year to the other. And secondly, I mean, you reflected on the origin of the CAP. Yeah, originally, after war, it was a mechanism to prevent hunger within Europe. There you're right. But since the 80s or early 90s, the CAP is an instrument to keep farmers alive and to have them producing for world market prices, so Europe could become the biggest agro-exporter of the world. So that's what we're doing in the moment. And in terms of eco schemes, I mean, well, if we look at the demanding situation that we have with global warming and with climate change, to say we're having 20 or 25% in eco schemes or so-called eco schemes. I even think some of those are greenwashing already, even in the 20 or 25%. And with 75%, we just keep on working in the same way as we did up to now. This is clearly not meeting the problem, and it's not accepting what science tells us, what we could do. And it is not really taking up the potential that agriculture would have to become, from now being a part of the problem, to become being a part of the solution. And so I must say, and this is not just my assessment, but of many scientists, but of many civil society organizations, if you calculate and if you look really into the potential impact this CAP will have, it is not meeting the goals of Green Deal. And this is actually quite worrying, because Green Deal is more or less just an announcement, a strategy. That's not a legal framework. But when it comes to the legal framework, we see that the actual legal framework is not meeting the goals.
Okay. This is a fantastic opportunity to throw the floor to Wolfgang. As the top EU official in the Directorate General for Agriculture, you were overseeing since the last couple of years. You've been looking at the development of the CAP reform, and the role of the Commission has been to play the role of the honest broker to try and bring these, which are obviously quite stark, different positions on agriculture policy together. So when you look at the results of the deal, do you think that this was kind of a compromise that was kind of cobbled together, and it's quite, it doesn't really make sense, and it's not really pulling in one direction, and maybe we need another CAP reform in 5 years, 7 years time to really change things? Or do you think this is how do you reflect on the deal? Is it a solid compromise, or is it a bit of a mess?
Thank you very much also for your kind invitation. Our conclusion on the CAP reform is that we have now a greener, a fairer, and a more flexible common agricultural policy. Does not mean that we have achieved our objectives in all these areas, but we certainly succeeded that our future common agriculture policy will be greener. You know, our budget is 387 billion euro, out of which 40% have to be dedicated to green measures. We have about almost 50 billion for the eco schemes. We have similar amounts in the second pillar for agri-environmental measures. we have increased the conditionality, which is the basis for full payments of direct payments. We have crop rotation, we have the obligation.
Well, crop diversification.
And crop rotation, and we have increased. But you raised already one of the points where I said we are not entirely happy with what we have achieved. A second point was certainly that we have achieved more in terms of giving nature back to, giving agricultural land back to nature through the 4% of fallow land in the good agricultural conditions online. So I think we have achieved good framework conditions for making the common policy greener. And I admit we have the framework, and in particular for the eco schemes, we have to carefully watch when we are now approving the national strategic plans, that what Thomas has referred to, greenwashing of such measures, does not occur. We really will carefully watch that the eco schemes that member states will design go beyond what is required under the legal framework. And in that sense, by the way, we are very similar to what Mr. Filzak has just pronounced. He said they do a lot of things voluntarily. Our eco schemes are voluntary for the farmers, as are the agri-environmental measures in the second pillar. So we also work with a lot of incentives, but it is true that if you look to the farm-to-fork strategy, there will be also modifications in the legal framework regarding pesticides. So I think we have a good combination in the farm-to-fork strategy with this thing. So I'm sure we will be greener.
Okay, let me just interrupt you there because you know I don't want us to get onto the strategic plans just yet. I'm interested as a sort of political journalist in how the negotiations really went. So Thomas, when you saw your colleagues in the European Parliament, you were obviously very heavily involved in the CAP reform as well. Who won the negotiations? Because we saw the talks collapsed in May, and then they came back in June and they got an agreement which was widely seen as a win for the governments, for the council. So do you think that the Parliament kind of crumbled at the end?
Well, I think the answer is not that easy. I even see quite some positive elements in the current CAP. I mean, there is progress, and we were pushing for that progress heavily, but there was a heavy pushback, and this was more from the centrist forces, basically EPP, so the conservatives, very much lobbied by the farming lobby in several areas. Let's talk about fair prices for farmers. That this is the key issue why we are losing thousands of farms every year. And I actually found one sentence of Mr. Wilson quite remarkable. He talked first about economical sustainability. Well, he's a US agri-minister. But then secondly, he talked about social sustainability. And where is the social sustainability if every single year thousands of farms are closing their doors just because they can't make a living from their work, and it's hardworking people. So it's about prices, producer prices, that we need to talk about. And in fact, the majority of farmers within the European Union, no, not just the majority, 99.5% of all farmers get less than 100,000 euros of subsidies. And we were strongly pushing for that proposal to limit the subsidies on 100,000 euros because it's taxpayers' money. And we said, okay, there has to be an end to the top, because big production, big industrial production is putting such a pressure on the producers' prices, and that is actually killing our farms. And we're financing it with taxpayers' money. And the parliament, even the conservatives, supported that. We had a majority for that, but it crashed in the negotiations with the governments, where Copa Cogeca did a good job to lobby against it, and they publicly stood up against it. But I could mention many more reasons, but
no, but that's a good one, and that's one we do. This idea of capping was probably the most politically, apart from all the climate change, environmental elements of the CAP. This idea of capping subsidies, mandatorily capping subsidies at 100,000 was a huge thing. So let's give the floor to Paolo. Why was COPA so against it?
Capping will lead to a situation where farmers will divide their businesses into smaller units and so to speak, fly under the radar.
So you mean it won't actually make a difference?
It will not meet the targets and the objectives you want to meet. It will only increase administration and bureaucracy. So that's why we think that capping is not a good idea. But the outcome of the proposal of the cap that we have on the table now include measures that you can handle these types of problems. Where there are voluntary possibility for capping or degressivity or,
Yes, there's
redistribution,
yeah.
which is kind of different things to handle the same problem. So
there's always been the possibility of voluntary capping, but I suppose the question this time was whether they should make it obligatory for the governments to actually introduce it, right?
But in some countries there is, I would say, you can find arguments for a measure like that. In other countries, they will actually be very harmful. In some countries of Europe, we have problem with passive farming, small landowners not using their land, just collecting the direct payments. They're not letting young people into farming, and they're not letting young people expand their farms. So in that situation, capping is a problem and not a solution.
And the Commission is going to keep pushing its position, in agreement with Thomas, that capping should happen at some point in a sort of legally enforced way, that countries must cap payments to huge farms?
Yes, remember that the Commission over several reforms now has proposed to cap as of 100,000 and to have degressivity as of 60,000. This was a very important political question which was even dealt with by the head of states. The decision to keep the capping voluntary made it up to the head of states. But still, I think I said we are optimistic that we still have a fairer common agricultural policy in the future, and there are several elements in the CAP reform to that end. Firstly, we have the redistribution of direct payments. 10% of direct payments need to be redistributed to small farmers. So that has the potential that farmers' income of smaller farmers will increase up to 10%. We have the internal convergence.
Yep.
Remember when
Let's explain what that means.
The payments were decoupled.
Yep.
They were related to production. So you had certain places in Europe where there were very high very high funding per hectare on special cultures, for example. And what we have done over the last years is to ensure that across Europe, per agricultural hectare, the basic premiums are getting similar. That's again a contribution to the fairer support. And I also think that the new schemes which we are offering, like the eco schemes, will have an opportunity or are an opportunity for small and medium-sized farmers to be more to get more out of the money. But I think for us, the question of the distribution of the funding is a key issue.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's to a certain extent a democratic process. I mean, I assume that the Council and the Parliament, they are co-legislators, and this is the outcome of the negotiations. We are not happy, but that's the result.
Paolo wants to come in here just quickly, because then I want to move on to talking about the strategic plans and things like that.
There is one perspective more on capping, and that is it's not the case that small farmers are necessarily more environmental friendly or more sustainable. What we see, in fact, is that the larger farms which are profitable are the ones who are investing in new techniques to move forward on sustainability. They are investing in precision farming, biogas digesters, for example, which reduce methane emissions. And the capping is actually punishing those effective farm businesses that are investing in the future. So,
answer quick response from you to that.
Yes, it's punishing Mr. Babiš, who gets between 30 and 50 million euros every year with his agrofert. It's punishing the 10 best friends of Mr. Orban, who have actually grabbed half of Hungary land and now occupying it and getting all the subsidies. Well, these people are punished. And the question on biodiversity is one on diverse landscapes, on diverse agriculture, and that you see in areas like Austria, where you have a still small-scale and medium-scale agriculture. You see a diverse landscape, diverse agriculture, and that serves biodiversity much better than fields of 200, 500, or 1,000 hectares.
I probably should have sat in the middle of these two. I've got we can't get bogged down in this. We can't get bogged. No. Sorry.
You cannot construct a cap out from 11 farmers.
Okay. That's a good line. Mr. Butcher, let's go back. You wanted to come in there, but then I've got to move it on to the strategic plans.
No, just on this point, I think big, small, this is always a discussion which we have in Europe. And there are arguments in favor and against. I very strongly share what Thomas said, that you have small farms in many places in Europe. I was recently in Slovenia, which contributes to all our objectives in terms of biodiversity and so on. And I also admit that there are big farms who are agri-environmental farms who play their role. So I think that is true. But what we should not underestimate in this discussion is also the perception of society of farming. And there is a perception also that people like small farming.
Yeah.
At least in certain places of the European Union, this is highly appreciated. And I think policy cannot entirely, policy making cannot entirely neglect what society is expecting.
Okay, that's a very interesting point, and I'm tempted to go into talking about Thomas's farm and all these sorts of things, but I think we need to move back to the dry policy. No, it's not dry, but it's certainly important. And then talking about the strategic plans, which you mentioned before. So just as a recap, each country needs to submit to the Commission, needs to land on Wolfgang's desk by 31st of December this year, a strategic plan, a national strategic plan on how they're going to implement this new CAP. I want to ask Wolfgang and just talk to you specifically about this. I mean, firstly, how confident are you that countries will actually deliver these plans on time? Because a lot of the countries, Belgium has 2 plans to deliver. Spain has, lots and lots of autonomous regions which it needs to talk to. Ireland is, potentially having a little bit of difficulty consulting on its plan. So, how confident are you that we'll get every single plan, 28 plans, because Belgium's got 2, by 31st of December? And if you don't get them, is it possible that they could maybe, wait a bit, maybe February, March next year?
Still, we have a lot less of plans, as you have indicated, because today the rural development plans are really regionalized. So we will have much less plans, but it is true that on the member state level, this requires quite some efforts to coordinate also the regions in federal countries and decentralized countries. Now, you are right, we are working under a very tight time schedule, because as it looks like the European Parliament will approve or will vote, let me say it like this, in order not to anticipate the result.
Yeah, I don't think Thomas is going to vote in favour, but let's not go into that.
We'll vote the Common Agricultural Policy in November, so we are optimistic, or we hope that the legal texts will be adopted in the official journal at the beginning of December, and that permits us then to make the final legal texts implementing and delegated acts so that member states can submit their strategic plans. But this timing does not mean that we are not already today in very close contact with member states.
Right.
Every day we are working together based on country desks which we have established in our DG with member states to prepare their national strategic plans. We have not yet received final versions of national strategic plans, but as you have pointed out, we expect that member states, since preparation in many countries is already well advanced, we expect to get these national strategic plans by the end of December. Then we have 3 months to examine these national strategic plans.
Right.
And then, if we like them a little bit, or we do not like them at all, we have the possibility to make observations to the member states. And within 6 months overall, so in the middle of 2022, we should then adopt these national strategic plans formally, so that member states can put them in place as of 1st January 2023.
Yeah. Well, let's imagine, because we talked to Janusz Wojciechowski, the Agriculture Commissioner, yesterday. Well, we also spoke to him in Slovenia, where you were, and we were there for an informal minister's trip. And he said he predicted that these talks between the national agriculture ministries and Brussels are going to be as politically tough as the actual negotiations on the CAP were. So what powers will the Commission actually have to make sure that these plans line up and link up and sync up with the Green Deal? If it gets really pushed to the line and the agriculture minister of some country is saying, no, I'm not making the changes, what's your final weapon? What's your final power that you have?
Let me first start by giving you some experience of the talks which have taken place until now in order to find out whether there are big challenges ahead. The first thing that member states have done in order to prepare the national strategic plans was to do their SWOT analysis in agriculture, in all these areas. Fair income, are they green enough, social sustainability, regarding all 9 specific objectives. And they have done an analysis, where are they strong, where are the weaknesses. Yeah. And we have looked at these SWOT analysis when we have made the recommendations to member states. So we have clearly identified, member state by member state, where are your weak points, also based on the proper SWOT analysis. So I think there is already an agreement on the weak points, the hotspots that member states need to address. And evidently these concern in particular the green specific objectives, be it relating to climate, to environment, soil quality, nitrate directive.
So you already know where the controversy could be.
We know it, and member states, remember, in the legislation, are supposed to provide us with indicators, with targets, how they will address these weaknesses relating to the specific objectives, regarding income, regarding soil quality, regarding pesticides. So the member states themselves will propose us intervention measures, how they will try to assess, how they will address the weaknesses.
Okay.
And it is up to us to judge then, in the context of the approval of the programs, whether we feel that they meet sufficiently the specific objectives of the Common Agricultural Policy, which are aligned to the Green Deal objectives.
Understood.
Often one makes a difference that the CAP objectives is something else than the Green Deal objectives. The CAP objectives is about improving environment, about improving biodiversity, about climate mitigation.
So you think there's already a sort of alignment? That's a slightly different question. I just want to I'm not sure which direction to take this in now, but I just want to. Okay, I want to hear from Thomas. And how do you feel about this upcoming process? Maybe you can talk about your native Austria and how things are going there in terms of the development of the strategic plan. Do you have confidence that the Green Deal and the CAP are going to be kind of brought together throughout this process over the next year?
Well, the framework is not going to push countries too far down the green road, but the negotiations are going to be tough. I mean, there's one new aspect in this CAP, which we call renationalization, which is basically a new strategic approach that the CAP basically sets goals and offers a lot of pathways to reach that goals, but actually nation states can develop their own pathways, can actually propose their own implementation strategies, how to actually reach those goals. And this will lead to a diverse funding schemes across the European Union. So every country will have different funding schemes, different criteria, different priorities. And I fear that this can also lead to a certain market distortion. I mean, especially for smaller countries. Austria is a small country. I'm in Styria. Half of my farm is in Slovenia. So it's Slovenian farmers, it's Hungarian farmers, it's Styrian farmers delivering to the very same slaughterhouse. And every one of these farmers will have a different income scheme, a different cap reward from the funding. So this could lead to certain market distortions. On the other hand, the renationalization allows countries to actually follow up on the strategies that they have had up to now. So for Austria, it has an advantage because no matter what Germany or France does, we can still support our mountain farmers in the way we do. We can still support organic agriculture in the priority.
There's a trade-off. It's a trade-off between renationalization, but also more kind of independence.
From an only Austrian view, I say, okay, renationalization is fine because we can do the stuff we're good in and we are successful with.
Right.
On the other hand, it opens a lot of doors for other countries and regions not to really follow up that strongly.
Paolo, how do you see this question of renationalization? I mean, that was kind of the whole idea of this CAP reform, was to give more power to the ministries to decide their own agriculture policy. From your native Sweden, how do you see things? Do you think that this is going to be a good thing? Is the CAP still a common policy?
It's a necessary and a very good way of working, that we have common targets, but we have different measures in different member states. I think the trick is to leave that maneuver room for member states, but still have a common agriculture policy. To strike that balance, that will be the trick, and to have a reasonable level playing field for farmers, no matter where they are around in Europe.
So is that desire to kind of fulfill the supposed ambitions of this CAP and give more independence to member states? That's why you won't. That's why the Commission has been very careful in saying they won't reject strategic plans, because it needs to be collaborative, right, between the Commission and the member states in the coming year.
Exactly. I think there is broad agreement on this effort to make the common agricultural policy more flexible, with risks of different policies to a certain extent regarding competition, as Thomas has referred to. But overall, I think it's the right choice. We have just heard a moment before one size fits all is not the right thing to do in the United States. Why should it be in Europe when the situation is very different? When the hotspots where problems are very different, or when we have certain hotspots where we have to address specifically issues, why everybody should do it if they do not have the problem? Why should you have the same discussion about organics? Thomas has referred to that Austria is already by 25% in terms of organic farming. So evidently they have to do less than countries that are at 1%. So I think it's the right thing, as you have pointed out, Pale, that we have common targets, but we leave still some discretion and flexibility to member states how to achieve these targets.
Yeah.
But it should not be a free brief to do what you want. That's not the purpose.
But you still didn't.
Because you have to deliver towards the objectives.
I want to come back to my original. This is the last time I'm going to ask you this question, but I don't think you quite answered it last time. What is the final resort that the Commission has to actually oblige countries to do what the Commission wants? I know you've explained the whole process with the SWOT analysis and everything, but when it comes down to it, let's imagine it's it's the end of 2022. The CAP starting tomorrow. We need to get this plan ratified, and we need to get some certainty for the farmers. What does the Commission do?
The national strategic plans require the approval from the European Commission.
Yes.
And this gives us a leverage to decide as to whether we feel the ambitions that member states have in terms of addressing our 9 specific objectives are coherent, consistent, and ambitious enough against the legal framework which we have created. I think that's the process that will take place.
Okay.
So evidently we will be demanding towards member states, because they will commit themselves to achieve the objectives. One objective is biodiversity, to increase biodiversity or intervention for biodiversity. So evidently we will carefully scrutinize the measures they have in the eco schemes, in the agro-environmental measures, in the enhanced conditionality, whether this advances their biodiversity in agriculture.
Okay. Let me ask a selfish question to the panel. I want to basically know how easy my job's going to be over the next year, because the question of transparency in these whole discussions, I think this is an issue which is close to Thomas's heart. I mean, you publish every kilometer of train journeys that you take on your website, and the Greens are very quite very punctilious about transparency. So do you think this process of approving the strategic plans and is it going to be a bit of a black hole between the ministries and Brussels and the back and forth, or do you what do you think about what's going to happen?
Well, the first black hole we see in most of the member states when it comes to actually draw up and design these CAP strategic plans, and in most of the member states there's hardly any participation from public, from civil society organizations. It's a very closed circle that is negotiating that. I would even say on the side of the Commission we find some more transparency than in many of the member states, but still it's negotiations between the Commission and the member state, and I think this is also something that shall take place in a kind of, let's say, safe environment that you can openly speak and openly negotiate. So I'm quite okay with how the Commission deals with it. I have some worries in member states, and I even say for my very own state, we're in a coalition with conservatives, in a rather difficult one, but we're in a coalition with conservatives, and even there it's hard for us, even within the government, to get hold of all the information because the agriculture ministry is held by the conservatives. So there's a lack of transparency.
Okay. Palle, do you want to tell us about how, have you been consulted on the Swedish plan?
Well, I don't share the same picture as Thomas. We know that the farmers' organization and other NGOs has been in a number of stakeholder meetings with governments and their authorities about the strategic plans over the last year, because we know that this was coming. We didn't know the details. So there has been an ongoing discussion, and we don't start with a white paper. A lot of the work with the strategic plan is already done, and from COPA's side, we still have faith that we could stick to the timetable.
For Sweden, I clearly believe that. For Sweden, I believe that.
Okay. I want to broaden out the discussion a little bit. Obviously, we have the German elections coming up on the weekend. I'm not going to ask anyone to make predictions about which way it's going to go, although I think, Thomas, I can imagine you have a clear desire for a winner. But the Greens in Germany and even in the SPD as well are already talking about the next CAP. It's something I was writing about this morning, and that they want to move the European agriculture policy, German policy, away from the direct payments, the area-based, land-based system for subsidies, and towards a more of a public money for public goods kind of system. So when we're thinking about already, the 2027 CAP, for example, does the Commission think that this is the inevitable direction that farm policy is going in? Are we going to eventually get rid of direct payments?
We have just agreed the common agricultural policy, and you are asking about the next one. We have built in hundreds and thousands of reviews to make an evidence-based policy. I think we should take this serious. If you are policy making, it should be, to the extent possible, evidence-based. So don't ask me what now happens as of 2027.
Right.
But I read these demands. But the question I ask is, if I told you now that 40% of the funding which we deliver is minimum public good based because it contributes to environment, are we not already delivering towards it?
Well, that 40% figure is
quite a moment.
Whoops.
The other
Calm down, guys. Calm down.
The other 60%, they are providing income to farmers, which ensure food security. Is this not a public cause? Is this not a public good that we have to eat every day? So, and look at the countries. We have now a country that has left the European Union. They will develop, if I read the papers, in one part of their nation, in England, by the way, because it is decentralized competence, so you might have a different common agricultural policy in Scotland and in Wales compared to England. But what I read in England is that they go towards such a policy.
Yes.
But how do you remunerate an environmental effort on a land? You do it based on a hectare. On what else will you do it?
So So for the time being, you don't see it changing.
No, I don't say this. I think we need a very honest, evidence-based discussion, looking at which common agricultural policy is best to address economic, environmental, and social sustainability. And there are no easy replies to this.
Right.
This is my only message.
But so you mentioned the England and Wales, the future of agriculture policy in England and Wales. I think we have some colleagues in the audience who can probably correct me and certainly know better than me from the UK mission. But I can imagine that the European Commission sees what the post-Brexit UK is doing as a bit of a rebuff, as a bit of a challenge to the CAP. Do you not think there's anything positive in what the British government is doing?
Yeah, but what do they differently? They remunerate the same things than we remunerate today: environmental efforts, welfare, animal welfare efforts. And look at the prices for the remuneration. At the end, they might be at the same level as what we are doing. So I have not a reply. I have not studied yet. The laws have not entered into force. My only message is it is easy to talk about public goods. But I'm convinced that public good is also food safety and food security in Europe. And we have the discussion on the strategic autonomy. And we also would like to have farming across the continent.
Right.
Everywhere.
Yes.
And what does it take to ensure this? And I think that's the challenge which we are facing. And I do not certainly anticipate the next reform.
Okay, Thomas?
Well, my point of view is that all the tax-funded CAP payments should take into account the public good. And even if it comes to productivity, and let's talk economics, we're in a situation where we have quite difficult situations for the farmers on the ground because we're the first ones that feel extreme weather, that feel drought, that feel global warming and the effects of climate change. And so it's not just about mitigating CO2, that's a key issue, but it's also about building resilience and preparing for a warming that is coming, that is happening already, and that we will not be able to prevent anymore. And that means all the CAP fundings, even if they go per hectare, I'm fine with that scheme if the goals are the right ones. Even if it goes per hectare, all the CAP money has to contribute to an increased amount of CO2, which resolves in humus, so to an increased amount of fertility on the soil, an increased capability of the soil to store water for droughts, but also to prevent floodings. Yeah? So to invest into the organic substance that is bound into the soil. And if all the CAP fundings per hectare have that kind of goal and that kind of target, that I'm fine on going hectare by hectare.
Okay, that's interesting.
But that's not what we have now. Now we have like 25% eco schemes, fine. Yeah, I mean, this is improvement. I sign up to that. That's improvement. But we still have 75% or 80% of the direct payments, which are not linked to this kind of public goods. And then let's talk about clean water. Let's talk about also biodiversity, which are public goods. But I just came from the economic angle. And if we want to preserve food security for Europe and for European citizens in all of the countries, we have to preserve the ability of our soils to actually produce food on it, even within the effects of global warming.
We have a panel on directly on soil, in about 2 hours' time. So we're looking forward to that. Paolo, we wanted to come in there.
Well, we follow the tradition that we start the discussion of the next reform before we have finalized this one. We've seen that in every reform before, so I don't think you have to worry that you will lose your job. You will have a lot of things to report about.
Thank you, that's very kind.
But let's be fair and keep in mind, this is a major change of the CAP, the proposal that is on the table right now. I would say that the change is compared in size to when we introduced the direct payments some 20-25 years ago.
Okay.
And farmers have shown that they can adapt to those changes if you give them time to do it. And the farmers will do it this time too. The CAP is more greener and more environmental friendly. This reform, probably the next reform will take steps in that direction too.
Yeah.
But let's not forget that the CAP has meant that the share of the consumers' affordable incomes that they spend on food has gone down from 30% when we started CAP to 12% now. And that is a major success. And CAP is actually about affordable food to consumer and not handing out taxpayers' money to farmers.
Wolfgang?
Just a short remark. I think also the remaining 75% in terms of direct payments, they are subject to the good agricultural and environmental conditions. So you cannot do whatever you want on your hectare. You also have already, to get the full payment per hectare, you have to do commitments with respect to wetland and peatland, with, as I said, diversification, rotation, keeping biodiversity elements. So even under the classical direct payments, there are elements of public good compliance. But I think it's a fair discussion how far this needs to go, in fact. But what I wanted just to say, there is another element in this. We have 6.7 million farmers that receive funding. And everybody is complaining about control issues and bureaucracy. And I think we need also to be aware, if it's about monitoring and checking whether farmers meet these requirements, it will be much more challenging than just to check whether a hectare is a hectare.
Yes.
So we need also to be aware of what it means in terms of control, bureaucracy, and administration.
That's a good point. I mean, when you mentioned this idea of the good agricultural and ecological, environmental practices, sometimes I get a bit lost in the jargon. I mean, how are you certain that this is, because what we had before was something called the greening, and that was in the previous CAP reform, which kind of came in 2013. How confident are you that this whole thing, which we're now calling enhanced conditionality, is actually enhanced? Is it actually definitely going to be, or in 5 years' time, are we going to be sitting on this very stage, and I'm going to be asking you, why was it a failure? Why did it go the same way as greening?
No, I think you raise really a fair point, and this is something that makes me concerned since I'm in this function, which is about measuring our performance. I think we need to do huge efforts. We have, for example, now 300,000 organic farmers in Europe. So if I read reports of the Court of Auditors and others, the conclusion always is there is no contribution of the CAP to biodiversity, That's the conclusion. But sorry, there are 300,000 farmers out who get funding from the CAP. Do you seriously think that they do not contribute to biodiversity? We have, in agri-environment, we have a measure, which is that you cut the meadows only at the end of July to ensure the blossoming of the flowers and to ensure that the birds have their nest or whatever.
Yeah.
Has this no impact on environment, on biodiversity? Is this nothing?
So that's your message
So
to the...
we really need to be able to say what we do, and if it's just to help to stop the negative trend, which is already something in terms of biodiversity. But I'm sad to see that we have many farmers who do a right job, and then come the reports and say the cap does not serve anything.
But surely, the auditors know what they're talking about.
I think the picture is more differentiated.
So you don't think the Court of Auditors is looking in the...
He's right probably in is our challenge to show that we perform.
Okay, I'm being shown a huge sign which says "Time's Up" in capital letters. So, time's up. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much to Wolfgang, Palla, and Thomas. It's been passionate. We've had, noises off stage, everything's going on. Probably the whole world's collapsed while we've been talking, but it's been really, really interesting. We've talked about, everything that the CAP deal contains, the environmental aspect, the economic aspect, farmers' incomes, the price of food. Well, we touched on that very, very briefly. Everything that's going to happen in the next year in terms of the approval of the strategic plans. I think that was absolutely fantastic. I thought it was really interesting. So there we go. I have to introduce the next panel, but will be a break right now. It's my colleague Zosha, who will be talking about the future of European farming. We were already talking about that, but in a slightly different way in terms of the new generation of farmers. But that will be in a couple of minutes. So anyone who's tuned in online, stay tuned. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.